On reading Possessions by John Smolens, one of the big takeaways for me as a person that likes to write is that the traditional structure of paragraphs wasn't all that important, and it still had quite an impact.
As a reader, I found that the choppy style of narrative didn't really take away from the story. In fact, I feel it added to the impact as like a window into the narrator's grief.
Yeah, which I think ties into possibly the target audience for a piece like that is someone that's experienced significant grief or might be facing it, or has for some reason become aware of their own mortality or that of someone around them.
I identified with that. It reminded me of when my grandmother passed away, going through a jewellery box, a wardrobe, so on, and each item had a memory attached.
Yeah, I felt very much the same when my own mother passed away, and I think that brings us into the purpose of this piece of fiction, which is really exploring the loneliness and isolation that grief can bring, especially, the loss of a significant person in your life.
I could definitely feel the loneliness of the narrator. The only company he has are his wife's possessions.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. He goes into a lot of detail on her possessions, from her pajamas to her coats to her shoes, and that lets the author sort of use literary devices like metaphors. Like he talks about her shoes being entombed and her coats thinking that they're goners in the cupboard, and he sort of personifies them in a way and gives them a life because that's the only company that he does have. And I think using words like entombed or gone, as it comes back to the central theme of death and grief, which was a really interesting way to do it. He hasn't used metaphors for the sake of them. He's really crafted this piece to sort of fit a lot into a short piece of writing.
I hadn't realised that the metaphors were so morbid and referring back to the central theme. That's really clever.
Yeah, it is. It is quite clever. And when you look at the other techniques that he's used, like for example, I think it's the very first sentence that doesn't make a great deal of sense because with flash fiction you don't get much of a background. So it's a deliberate sort of move combined with the choppy sort of style of writing and the lack of structure to it. That sort of is more indicative of the state of mind of someone that might be in the throes of a deep grief. It might not follow a lateral logical pattern.
Even though it doesn't have that structure, the language used is quite easy to follow, but it's still really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's used like almost a conversational tone, and the language, like it's simple, but I think that's where its power actually lies. Anyone could pick this up and understand where he's coming from. So it's not necessarily aimed at the intellectual crowd. It can be for anyone. And I think with grief being such a universal theme, a lot of people would really strongly identify with what he's shown in this glimpse of writing. Because flash fiction is always quite short, usually no more than about 1,000 words. And it doesn't necessarily have to have a traditional structure, and you don't get much background. So it really is just, as you said earlier, a window into someone's experience of grief.